what's going to happen in the Commons possibly this week. Is there going to be a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister this week?
Well, what we've said quite clearly is that we need to make sure that we get no deal averted. And what concerns me again today is we've seen that speculators are potentially going to profit off a no deal who are also backing Boris Johnson. That worries me about a conflict of interest there. We want to make sure that we get no deal off the table before we do anything else. And that's the difficulty that we face currently.
That suggests to me that you don't think there's going to be a vote of no confidence this week in the House of Commons, because that would have to be led really by Jeremy Corbyn, your leader. You must have had discussions about it. You must know what's going to happen.
Jeremy Corbyn's really clear that he wants to make sure that we don't go off a cliff edge and have a no-deal Brexit, because we know that that would be disastrous for ordinary families and for businesses across the UK. We will not do that. We will not help Boris and his friends make profit off the back of our country ending up in disaster. We want to make sure that we have an orderly exit from Europe, and that's why we've put systems in place through the Ben Act to make sure that we don't end up crashing out. And I think that's a responsible thing for any future Prime Minister or Prime Minister of today to do.
Boris Johnson made the point, fairly enough, that the Commons has had 3 years to talk about these things and talks and talks and talks and doesn't have an answer of its own. You've now got more days to talk. What are you going to do with it?
Well, some of the things that we've said right from the start is that we've got to make sure we've got a new customs union that will help and assist with the situation in Northern Ireland. We've said that we've got to have access to the single market, and we've also said that consumer employment and environmental protections have to come first. So we've been very clear. We've been very clear on what we believe should come out of those negotiations with Europe. We haven't been given that chance. We tried at the very last minute with Theresa May to get a deal. That wasn't forthcoming. We now need that opportunity to take that forward. Parliament have expressed their wish, and that is that we are not going to leave without a deal. We want to find a deal. Boris Johnson is acting irresponsibly at the moment and not allowing us to go anywhere but crash out of Europe, which will be disastrous.
And then Labour policy is now that you will negotiate this and take it back to the people in another referendum. You have in the past described another referendum as disastrous. How are you going to explain that change to your voters?
Well, I think it's an absolute failure that we've ended up in this situation. As you say, we've had 3 years of negotiations and we still haven't been able to provide a solution. That's the Conservatives that have done that. And I think it's their red lines that they set themselves. And Boris Johnson couldn't even vote for his own Conservative
deal. You're going to go ahead
deal.
with something you call disastrous?
So, no, we haven't been given the opportunity to negotiate a deal.
Policy.
We said that we want an opportunity to negotiate a deal. Once we get that deal and we know what that deal looks like, we'll put that back to the people, because we now know what was said before. What was said before is not actually where we are. We need to understand what the realities is, what deal we can get, and then put that to the people alongside whether or not they want to remain, based on the knowledge that we know now. We're 3 years down the line, and we know that what we was told then is not where we are now. And I think that's the only option that is available to us now, because the Conservatives have failed to be able to provide a deal.
Another bit of chatter about what the Commons might do over the next few weeks is reduce the voting age to 16. Is that possible?
I've not heard that chatter, but I think it's absolutely...
Would you like to see that?
I would like to see votes at 16, because it was something, as a young mum myself, when I was a mum at 16, and as a trade unionist, I thought was a really important policy to take forward. You know, I think that 16-year-olds are responsible enough to make decisions about voting. They could join the army, they can have children.
You'd like to see
I think they should be able
which
to
could
do
affect the next election if you brought it in now to take the vote down to 16.
I absolutely agree with that policy.
Big boost for the Labour Party, of course.
I absolutely have always agreed, even before as a Member of Parliament, and it was my colleague Jim McMahon from Oldham who put that legislation forward. I absolutely approve of that.
Talking about sort of selling things on the doorstep as we were just now, what about this idea of the Labour Party conference going for complete free movement of people? A new regime which will be much more, as it were, pro-immigration, pro-migration in both directions than now. That is going to be a hard sell to people who voted leave in your constituency, partly on the issue of immigration.
Well, we've said we want a fair system, and I think that there's one of the distinctions between ourselves and the Conservatives at the moment. We won't dog whistle to blame immigration for the issues that we face in our society around the cuts to public services. We know where austerity has come from. It's come from the Conservatives. If you look in our National Health Service, if you look at a lot of our public services, there's a lot of people that come to this country. But I think it's really important that we say quite categorically that people come to this country have given a net income increase to our country and have a value, and that we shouldn't be scapegoating people that come to our country legitimately to either learn in our institutions that props up our education system or through our public services.
Your party conference has committed the Labour Party to maintain and extend free movement, to go much further than we are at the moment. Are you really sure that's going to be a popular policy on the doorstep?
I think it's misleading to suggest that somehow we just have complete open borders. That's not the case.
That's more or less what your party
That's
policy
not the
says.
case. We've said we need a fair system, but we won't scapegoat for people that have made the England and made the UK their home, who have contributed to our society. We have a long history of that, and I think it's important that we recognise that. We're not going to allow language on the streets like Boris Johnson used, like calling Muslim women letterboxes, and allowing that dog whistle of racism to take hold in our country. I'm proud to be part of the UK that's multicultural, and I think we have to have a fair system that recognises that.
The other